Hey guys, Murali here. In this video, I'm going to be talking about how to choose medical schools to apply to so that you can apply to the ones that are right for you. Alright, let's get started. So when you're applying, one of the most important things you can do is spend time to decide what medical schools you're going to apply to. I think a good number to choose is around 15 to 20. If you do less than that, you're not widening your pool enough and you're really minimizing your options of getting responses back. And if you do more than that, I personally don't think you're going to be able to spend enough time on those applications in order to make them good enough to really represent who you are. So it's really important then to make sure to spend the time researching a good number, 15 to 20 schools, so that you can be sure that you're applying to the schools that are best for you and you're maximizing your opportunity and chance of getting it. And the only way that you're going to actually be able to choose the schools that are best for you is to actually sit down and spend time researching them. Without doing that, spending that time and actually looking into those schools, you're not going to be able to gain enough information. But if you do that, I think you'll slowly begin to get an understanding of what each medical school is like, and it'll help you figure out what to do. So best thing you can do is just get started looking at medical schools. But in this video, I'm going to give you some tips and some tools that you can use to help you along your way. So this first group of tips or tools is going to be based on choosing medical schools off your stats. So where you align with your stats, GPA, MCAT, compared to the averages of most medical schools. One of the things that people worry the most about in their application are their stats. And while they are important, they're not necessarily the most important thing, and they're not the only thing that medical schools look for, but they are important. So these tools are going to help you select schools based on those ranges of those stats. So the first tool I'm going to be talking about is the MSAR, which is the Medical School Application Requirements thing. It's an official AAMC tool that has a bunch of stats of all the medical schools in the US, including median GPAs, median MCAT scores, and things like that. And it allows you to it's a very neat tool where you can toggle different filters on their website and find schools that match your requirements in terms of whether or not they're public, whether or not they have a certain median range, or just like where their median range is and what kind of MCAT score they have. And so if you look at those, if you look at that list and use those filters, it'll help you get a better idea of what the stats for different schools are. Most of them are fairly competitive, but it'll help you get an idea of which schools accept a bit lower GPAs versus which schools accept higher GPAs. And that might help you inform your opinion. The reason why so if you find a school with a lower GPA, I think it's important to note that there might be multiple reasons why. It might not just be that they accept students with a lower GPA. They might be accepting students with a lower GPA because of a certain reason. So an example could be that some of those students have a residency status. If they're a public school, they need to accept a certain number of applicants who have residency in their state. And so they'll forego a higher GPA for a lower GPA but a residency status in some cases. So that might be why you see a lower GPA. So just to make sure that you don't immediately think, oh, lower GPA means if I apply with my GPA, I'll definitely get it. That's not the case at all. They look for a lot of different things, but this tool will help you narrow down your pool. Another tool that I think is really useful for looking at your stats and just comparing it to the overall applicant pool is the WARS applicant rating system. So this is something that I found on Reddit, but I'll link it below. Along with the MSAR thing, I'll link it below, and you guys can check it out for yourselves in the description. So the WARS tool is a way for you to look at your application on a more holistic level, but it is fairly superficial, I think, because essentially what you're doing is equating all of your experiences, including your MCAT, your GPA, your extracurricular activities, your volunteering activities, your leadership activities, the rigor of your academic program at school, all into objective variables. So you're converting everything into a number based on your own opinion of what those things value. They have a guideline for you to help you determine that, what, say your extracurriculars equal in a number, but then based on those numbers, they then give you an applicant score, and then they have tiers of different schools ranked so that you can compare your applicant score and see what schools you would be competitive for. A neat idea, it seems sort of superficial in terms of converting everything into a number. I'm not sure that translation is actually very effective because everyone's experiences are different and the lessons you gain from those experiences are very different. And when you're writing your application essays, it's not just, oh, I did XYZ extracurricular activity. What the med schools want to see is what you learned from those activities and how you intend to use those lessons going forward. So the application is very subjective and the value of certain experiences is very subjective, but the WARS tool tries to bring some objectivity to those experiences. So you should only trust it minimally, but it can give you a good idea of what schools you might be competitive for just off a cursory glance. These two tools, the MSAR and the WARS tool, will help you narrow down medical schools based on your stats and just give you a general idea of where you'd be competitive and what schools might be a reach for you. So the next group of tips and tools for you all to use is choosing schools based on your fit. And I think this is a lot more important than just choosing schools based on your stats. Because like I said, a lot of the application is subjective, so just your stats won't necessarily mean everything. They'll help you get into certain competitive medical schools, but deciding where you'll be happy and where you'll learn the most is more subjective, and that's based definitely more on fit. Whether or not your ideals or your values align with the medical schools, what the kind of curriculum is like, and whether or not that helps your teaching or your learning methods and what you want to learn even. So what I'm going to give you now are just some things to consider when you're looking at schools based on their fit. Some of this information can be found on the MSAR tool that I mentioned before, but a lot of it might have to be found on the actual med school's website and in some of their documents that they might have available. So the first thing that I suggest looking at is curriculums of schools. What types of things do the medical schools focus on? Or I guess, what would you be learning if you went to that medical school? When talking to medical students, do they say that medical school has a good number of clinical opportunities for you to get involved with? Will you have a lot of hands-on experience when you're there? Is the medical school near a lot of other hospitals, perhaps in a medical center? Like in Texas, in Houston, with the Texas Medical Center, if you go to Baylor and McGovern, you're also getting the opportunity to get experiences at the other hospitals in the area, like MD Anderson, which is a great opportunity for research, but also for treating patients, getting clinical opportunities. Another thing that I think you should consider when you're looking at schools is looking at the missions of the specific schools. And I remember when I looked at a lot of the missions when I was applying, a lot of them blended together or they seemed very similar. But if you look very closely and really parse through what the medical schools are saying, you'll see differences in what they value and what their goals are. Based on medical schools' missions, I think you'll be able to see if there is a general focus more on patient care or local and community health versus research and discovery and developing new treatments. While all medical schools are committed to general health, I think you can definitely determine what each medical school values in terms of how they deliver care or what their goals are in terms of discovering new treatments and things like that. And based on those missions, it can be very helpful for you to think within yourself, what do I want to gain from my medical school experience? Do I want an experience that gives me more community health practice? Or do I want to be involved in research and the development of new therapies and treatments? Because then that'll help you differentiate between medical schools and what you also want to do in your career. And that's something that's useful for you to write down in your essays when you apply. Location is also another big thing that can help you decide where you want to go. Not only because of personally what will be around you, like if you're in the Rio Grande Valley, it's not going to be as urban of an area compared to a New York General Hospital or something like that. But also the type of medicine that they practice and teach will be different. While both might be trying to serve underserved communities, the types of patients that you'll get will be very different. Also, in terms of location, I cannot stress this enough, apply to your state schools. Most states don't have that many med schools. There's only a few where like Texas or like California that you have upwards of like 6, 7, maybe even 8 medical schools in a single state. But make sure to take advantage of the state schools in your state, because like I mentioned, some medical schools have a requirement of how many seats that they need to offer to state residents. Like Texas, 90% of all the seats need to be filled by Texas state residents, which makes it a lot less competitive or a lot easier for Texas applicants to get in. And it makes it a lot harder for out-of-state students to get in. So make sure to take advantage of those seats that are reserved for people like you. That also holds for applying to schools where you are out of state. It's going to be a lot harder for you to get in, even harder than maybe getting into a private school. So make sure to think about those things when you're applying. And I'd say don't apply to very many med schools where you are out of state unless you have a certain connection to that school or a specific reason for applying to that school. An additional factor to consider when you're applying to medical schools is the cost of medical school. It's very expensive, and it's a lot of years. It's 4 years, and if tuition is $50,000, that's a lot of debt that you're accruing. Even the difference between $50,000 and $70,000 over the course of 4 years is still $80,000. So that's a very big thing to consider. And so applying to state schools where tuition is cheaper for you as an in-state resident will also make it easier for you to, in the long term, in terms of student debt and managing your finances and your budget. So make sure to think about that as well when you're applying. So generally out-of-state schools are a lot more expensive, but the only exception that I really know of is Texas medical schools, where even for out-of-state students, tuition is almost like in-state in other states. So even if you are out-of-state, I'd consider maybe applying if you have a connection to Texas medical schools. But like I said before, 90% of the seats are reserved for Texas residents. So it's very hard to get into Texas medical schools if you're not from Texas. But yeah, that's all the content that I have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, make sure to check out my playlist on medical school applications. I'll have it linked somewhere around here. But yeah, that has a lot of information about specific parts of the application, like the primary application, the secondary application, and I'll be updating it over the next couple months. So make sure to check that out. And if you like this video, make sure to leave a like down below or a comment. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer any of those in the comment section below, or you can email me. And if you want to see more videos like this, or just about the med school application process in general, make sure to subscribe. All right, peace. Have a nice day.